Right, Troy, thanks for joining us on the NORMLESS podcast, mate. It's a pleasure to have you, and thanks for giving up your time today. I know you've jumped on a few podcasts lately. I saw you were on one yesterday, and then I was also looking online, and there was a couple of you've been on recently. So, you've been a busy man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, keeping yourself busy between clients, we've obviously got the podcast today, which is going to be a really interesting insight into your story. I think when I first reached out to you, I was going through some of your Instagram posts and just seeing the extent of the runs you've been able to conquer. It's really, trail running, ultra endurance events and marathon running now have really become a big thing, haven't they?
Yeah, it's really taken off. Like even when I started running, I think it was like 5 years ago, like no one in my area was sort of running. They'll do maybe a few guys will do like a marathon or so, but yeah, everyone's getting into it, like even like triathlons and cycling. It's great. I think as you get older, you realize that contact sports aren't the way to go. It's just pounding the pavement for hours and hours on end.
And mate, you didn't just conquer a marathon or an endurance event of that nature. You conquered a run from Perth all the way to Sydney. So that's almost 4,000 kilometers across Australia, and you did it in almost 73 days. Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about how you got to that point where you were going to actually perform a run of that extent, mate?
So it all started about because I'm a personal trainer. We did like a run club, and we're doing a run club to do Southerner Surf. If you know Southerner Surf, it's in Cronulla in Sutherland Shire. It's 11K fun run from Sutherland to Cronulla. So it was supposedly meant to be fun, and I hated running. I only ran probably like a few times when I played football back in like under 12s, under 13s, and I sort of got roped in to do it because we had a few clients do it, and I was like, no, I don't want to do it. And our boss was like, come on, we'll do like a few training runs before. So I think we did like a 4K and maybe a 6K a few weeks before, and I was like, shit, this is going to be hard. And then took off and ran and made it about 6K. My boss just took off and left me with my other mates that was running with it. And 6K in my legs just blew out, and I was like, never felt like that sort of pain in my legs before. And then finally managed to crawl across the finish line right at the end, and I thought to myself, this has got to be the shittest thing ever, but I'm so bad at it. Why not try and become the best at it? So after that, I did seated surf, which is only 14K, and then I started doing like half marathons, and then I thought like, well, what's the biggest race that anyone's ever done, or the biggest race out there? And what I found at the time, which I realized was bigger races than that, was Racing the Planet. So it was a 6-stage multi-leg marathon, self-supported. So it's 250 Ks broken up into 6 days. So you do like stages where it's like 40, 40, 40, 70. And the remaining distance you hit 250 kilometers, but you're self-supported. And I was like, that seems like the biggest thing ever. That's what I want to try and achieve to do. And the mate's like, why don't you just make your own run? Why don't you run from Perth to Sydney? And I was like, that's way bigger. All right, I'm doing it. And then that was about probably I think maybe like 3 or 4 months after I started. And then I was like, I'm going to try and get it done in a year. So I was like, went and hit up a few running coaches. I think it was about 5, because my boss was like, I know a lot about personal training, but nothing about running. And I was like, he goes, I can't help you here. I'll plan the run for you. I'll help you plan it. But you're going to have to find a coach that knows stuff about running, because I have no idea. So I hit up about 5 people, and they all just turned me down. They're like, how long have you been running for? And I was like, oh, about like 4 or 5 months. They're like, yeah, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to make it. It's impossible. And I was like, well, I need to find someone that actually believes in me like I did myself. And one of the running coaches put me onto my old running coach, Luca, and he's like, I only train crazy people or super disciplined. You seem like you're both. So I end up have to push it back a year due to COVID because of restrictions, but end up doing it in 2 years since I started running. So that was sort of how it all came about.
It sounds like quite a like when I was listening to Ned Brockman's story too. He came up with the concept of running from Perth to Sydney, sitting at the pub with his mate having a beer. Was that the same thing for you? How did how did it all come about? Were you sitting in a pub, or when did this all take place?
I actually remember it quite clear. So we're running along the beach, like along Cronulla, and we're just running. And I was just telling him how it was like the middle of winter, and we're going to run to the end and back, which is like 8K at the time, and then we do like a Shark Island swim in speedos. We thought, well, heaps tough back then, just like swimming in winter in speedos, just to sort of like push the limits of like, if I can like do this, then what else can I do? Like, what can I achieve? If I can run 11K, then run 14, then run a marathon, like how far can I go? And I was just telling him about like what I wanted to do, like try and do the biggest race I thought was out there, which I found out there's a lot bigger races than the Racing the Planet one. And he's like, you got to make your own. You got to make it something different. Why don't you run from Perth to Sydney? And that's sort of how it came about on a beach run in the middle of winter.
And then after that comes a whole host of planning, no doubt. The extent of planning and preparation that would have gone into this would have been immense. Can you talk us through, who made up your support crew and what that looked like?
Yeah, so when I first decided to do it, I was like, I had no support crew. I didn't really tell anyone about it. I was like, I'm just going to put it out there and figure it all out after. And I was like, I'll find someone. I was like, actually, who's going to have 2 months off work to sit in a van and drive behind me what I thought? And I was like, fuck, I got no idea what I'm doing. Anyone that knows me pretty well knows that I hate organizing stuff and I hate planning stuff. I'm a lot better now, obviously, after that. But I started going out with a girl she's like, I'll come with you. And I was like, oh, sweet. So my support crew was just me and her. So the most stripped back support crew you could have. Like, I follow a lot of guys that do big things and they have like massage therapists, photographers, videographers, just a team of people. And it was just me and her. So we did the most stripped back and probably hardest way possible.
So she was the dietitian, she was the massage therapist, the cook, the cleaner, the support driver,
the hairdresser. Yeah, she was everything apart from wipe my own ass. So and run. So I originally thought when she just said yes, I was like, this is going to be. I reckon driving's going to be worse than running. And then I got about 10 days in, and I was like, no, running's definitely worse. I'd rather be in that van.
And we'll talk a bit more about the legislation and the laws between Queensland and New South Wales and Melbourne. And I was kind of looking into all the different runs that people like yourself have done across the country. And a lot of people have kind of aimed at focusing on that Perth to Sydney and for a good reason that, coming down from Queensland, the laws are that, your van or your support vehicle has to actually trail behind the runner, as opposed to, Perth to Sydney, where they can actually leapfrog you and go ahead of you. So how was that? How did you find that? Did that make things a lot easier? Her going ahead and being able to get food for you, stopping at cafes or, restaurants along the way to pick up some food?
Yeah, so I sort of had no idea like what I was doing, and I got in contact with Pat Farmer, who's currently running around Australia, and I think he's done Perth to Sydney like twice already. And I sat down with him, and he was talking about like there's two ways you can do it. You can either get insurance, and then you have to notify every state and every council driving through there when you're driving through, if you want to drive behind. Like there was this whole like a long list of shit I had to do. And I was like, and he's like, or you could just run it and she just drives ahead and then stops and drives ahead. And I was like, I think that's the one I'm going to do. Because I don't sort of want her driving 10K behind me and then she nods off and takes me out. But yeah, so we did the leapfrog way, which is, I found the best way. There was no stress on running a certain pace the whole time with her behind me, or she could go ahead and like she studied a lot and did a lot of reading and stuff. So she was just sort of like leapfrogging, stop, and then when I'd rock up. So I found that was the best way. But yeah, I haven't really heard about the laws from Queensland to New South Wales. But and yeah, so I reckon leapfrogging's better. You're just sort of out there. There's no stress on getting to a certain point at a certain time.
And so how much weight did you lose throughout the run? And I guess, how are you getting enough food down, or were you not getting enough food down? Like, what did your daily intake look like?
Yeah, so I started it around, I think I was about 94, 5 now. I think I was like about 97. And I think I ran in at about 88.6, which is the lowest I've been in a while. So I lost a little bit, but yeah, the food was absolutely terrible because I'm plant-based. I don't eat meat. And if anyone's driven from Perth to Sydney or Sydney to Perth, they'd realize that there's not Woolworths every 20 Ks like there is in suburbia. It's a big stretch of nothingness. And there's about 3 weeks worth of running that don't have supermarkets, only roadhouses. And it's just like disgusting petrol food. So we realized that about day 4 into that stretch that we're not going to have fresh fruit or vegetables. So at points I was eating raw pasta, baked beans. I tested every veggie burger along the along the stretch as well. So it was just a lot of terrible foods, and that sort of took a toll on me mentally as well. Like your food is fuel, and you are what you eat. And I was eating shit, and I felt like shit a hell of the time through that stretch. But then I remember saying to her, I was like, I can't wait to just get like a capsicum, some carrots, and just like eat something good, because you just felt like terrible.
And so I did a marathon recently. I did the New Run marathon, and I had this kind of mindset that if I stopped running at any point, I'd fail. And it was like I just made sure I keep running the whole way through. I've listened to a few different podcasts with one gentleman called Sean Bell, and he was talking about how there's this, I guess, analogy or I guess protocol amongst a lot of ultra marathon runners, that there's like a 13-minute run, 2-minute walk. Like if you're doing like a 24-hour run or something like the bad water in the States.
Yeah.
Did you ever, was there a protocol where you would run for a certain amount of time and then break into a walk, give yourself some time to eat? Or was it just, running completely from Perth all the way to Sydney?
Yeah, so I was sort of like, I ran and I was just enjoying it. So if I see something cool, I'd stop. I wouldn't be like, I can't stop now because I have to run for another 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's like I'd sort of run, and then I'd walk a bit and then just have a look around. I'd find like a lot of weird things along the highway along the way. So I have heard of that protocol as well. It's a good one for like track races and stuff. But I was sort of just ran as long as I want. I'd walk a lot of the time. I'd walk the hills. Some hills were like 3K long, just vertically up. But yeah, I just sort of how I felt, because a lot of the time my body was fucking killing me. So there's a lot of time where I was doing a lot of power walking, and there's a lot of time where it felt great, where I was just running for as long as I wanted until I got back to the van and I'd fuel up and keep going.
And like there were some pretty fucked up stories from the run. I hear you can talk to the listeners about that, whether it be injuries or just severe pain, whether that be mentally or physically. There was a point in the run where you contemplated actually breaking or like snapping your tibia fibula just so you would be able to pull out of the run. Can you talk to us a bit more? That's so fucked, man.
Yeah, I was. I remember it like it was yesterday. So I was about. So you got like the Nullarbor, which is like the Nullarbor is classified as like, I think it's like 320 kilometers, but like the Nullarbor plain is like 20 kilometers. I remember I didn't have reception because I was with Vodafone at the time, and you only get reception in Sydney, Melbourne, and probably Brisbane. That's it. And anywhere else in Australia, you don't get reception. So I had no reception from pretty much the first day outside of Perth until I got to Mildura, I think. So it was like maybe like a month where I didn't have solid reception. So that was the first problem. Then trying to ring a provider when I was in the middle of nowhere, and then trying to go to a store on the way, which there was none. And there was all these problems I just stacked together one day. I was in pain. I had there was shit food, the phone, and in the outside world that these problems are easily fixed. But when you're out there stranded and you're just so drained emotionally, physically, spiritually, I was like, I'm just fucking done with this. I just wanted to be over. So I was about halfway across Australia, and I was like, the only way that I could physically do this is if I break my ankle, because I wouldn't just pull out and then just drive home and say I couldn't make it. It's like I have to actually physically hurt myself where I can't run, and then I'll just drive to Queensland for the other 3-4 weeks, and I'll just hang out there. And by the time I get home, everyone will have forgotten about it, and they'd be like, "Oh, yeah, I made it halfway." So I was like, if I'm going to break it, I was thinking about I'd be jumping, because the embankment was like on a slope. I was going to jump and like land on it, and I was like, just if you're going to do that, just do it tomorrow. Just get through today. And it's the best thing I did, just pushing it back a day, because I woke up the next day and was like, holy fuck, if I had a snapped ankle, I'd still probably try and run on it. So your mind plays tricks on you out there. You're just trying to justify and reason a way out of it, because you're in so much pain, you're so drained, that you just think if that's a logical answer at the time, and now you look back on it, you're like, that's one of the stupid things I've probably thought. But yeah, so you can imagine how hard it would be out there. And it got to that point, but I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah, I think most people would try and snap their ankle if they were, had a 2.5, 3 hour long playlist of 50 songs on rotation. But yeah, I was listening to Ned's story we were talking about before, but he had a similar thing, like a make or break moment in the middle, where it was almost like, do we give up or, push ahead? And I think there was one day in the middle of the run where he went to sleep early to get some extra rest. He sort of did a shorter day, I don't know, 20 Ks or something, rested up, got some injections, and then really pushed ahead. What in that run? What was the turning moment for you? Was there a point where you know, I think I remember in one of the podcasts I was listening to that you were on, you bumped into a little puppy dog or something along the run, and it kind of lifted your spirits a bit.
Oh yeah, Sparkles. Yeah,
Sparkles.
it was a farm dog. I don't know why I named it Sparkles. I thought it'd be funny. It's a cool name. Yeah, but I found a farm dog. I think it was about a day out of Mildura, about 60 k's out of Mildura, and just running with the dog was quite cool. I'd like to document everything and take videos and photos and stuff. So that was a cool moment. But I think the turning point for me was, I think from about day 7 to 14. So that was a week where, maybe week to 9 days, where my body was just like breaking down. Obviously, after running like 60 k's a day for nearly a week straight, you get pains everywhere. My ankles swelled up, and I was like, couldn't walk. That's similar to Ned's story. And then I was just like, fuck, how am I going to make this? I can't even make like 2 weeks. How am I going to make another 40 odd days? So I was like, just do what you can, and then I'll figure it out. And then I sort of fell behind. My goal was 60 k's a day for 65 days. My partner at the time, she's like, why don't you just push it back a week? Because I always wanted to get back on the weekend. I was like, and she's like, then you're going to have to do like this many k's a day. It's more achievable. As it was coming into more winter, you got less daylight, so you had less time to run. And then I was like, because I didn't want to push myself and fucking hate it. Like, I loved the whole experience. Obviously, there was points a lot of the time where I was like, this is the worst thing ever. But I still look back now and was like, that's one of the coolest experiences I've had, of just traveling Australia on foot and seeing all the places in between and seeing all the nothingness. But I think after my body sort of, my mind aligned, where it's like, he's not going to stop. Okay, well, let's start healing these injuries, because he's just going to keep going. So there's a point where after a while your body will break down, and then it'll start to rebuild and become stronger. And then by the end of it, I was the strongest I was. And then I got home and was still running the next week.
I think it's hard for people to kind of conceptualize it when they're working 9 to 5, thinking, oh shit, you know, running that long within a day. But I guess if you've got, you know, that support from your ex-partner there, and you know, your whole day is spent sort of focused around that journey, especially being out on the road throughout the day, I think it would make it a bit more. Obviously, I'm not going to say it's enjoyable running 4,000 kilometers the whole journey, but to some extent, it would be make it things a lot more, I guess you could say, palatable to some extent. How much money did you raise in total throughout the journey?
So I ended up raising about just under, I think it was $65,000. So I was more stoked to raise anything, really. I got halfway and I was like, I've only raised like $20,000. And I was like, this is how much the run pretty much cost. So I was like, I should have just not ran and just donated the money that I paid to do it as well. And I was like, nah, it was good. And then sort of towards the end, it sort of started jacking up. And it wasn't so much about the money for me. It was about sharing my story and having conversations like this where I can share my story and hopefully help people. Like, the money's great, and it does a lot of great things in the community. Like, Mindful's a great non-for-profit, and I know Matt really well now, and I've went down to the schools he teaches his programs in, and it's just like, they're amazing programs. But for me, it was the money. It was obviously a great thing, but it's more about raising awareness for mental health and showing people that they can do things if they put the mind to them, and they can come from rock bottom and then turn it around, and whatever they're running across Australia may be, they can achieve it with a bit of hard work and dedication.
So I think Sam Gash kind of pioneered a lot of that running for change movement where, and you know, we were just talking about before, but you see so much of it now, people raising money for a charity, trying to conquer a journey like this that, you know, they never thought they could. And I think it really is, it's one of the most powerful ways to generate, I guess, change, whether it be, you know, as you said, through financial, you know, through donations, or just purely getting the word out there and spreading the message of, you know, the struggles you've been through and the major changes you're making in your own life. Now you also did some crazy journeys from Sydney to Melbourne, Sydney to Gold Coast. If you had to pick between the two, which of those you probably enjoyed the most, or I guess the three, going Sydney to Perth, which one was probably your favorite and why?
They all have their sentimental values. So the Perth to Sydney was a run, and then the Sydney to Melbourne, Sydney to Gold Coast was a cycle. But that was one of my mates who I met through running. Obviously, after I got back, he reached out and he's like, we should go run together. And we're an odd bunch. Cycling seems easier. Like, I don't really train to cycle. I'll just jump on a cycle. I could jump on a bike and just ride from Sydney the Goldie. But yeah, running's more painful, but it's more rewarding, where cycling's more enjoyable but less rewarding, but you can have more fun. So they're all great. I wouldn't change any of them, and I couldn't pick one over the other.
So I guess when we talk back to kind of what made you pursue this challenge, we talked a lot about where it's kind of started in terms of the conversations and I guess setting up for the run. But in terms of the actual background behind how you got into running in the first place, and also how it sort of changed your life, stems a lot back to some of the mental health challenges you've had throughout your life, including things like drug abuse and being a party goer growing up. Can you talk to the listeners a bit about what it was in your early life or what was it like in the early days? And, you know, how have you changed since then? You're obviously a very different human now to the person you were back then.
Yeah, so it all sort of, I guess everyone goes through that little party stage. To what extreme, everyone's completely different. But I think the worst point of that was one of my good friends. She fell off the ridges and passed away. And I was partying at the time. And then when that happened, I was just like, fuck it. I was just super upset, didn't know how to deal with it, grieving. I was just getting on drugs from Friday till Sunday and taking stupid risks. And I call it like a drug-induced depression. So obviously, if you're upset and maybe depressed or on the borderline depression, whatever it is, and you start taking drugs, you're never going to feel better long-term. Short-term fix, a little escape from reality at the time, but it's always going to make you feel 10 times worse. And I'll know, well, I won't sit here and go, don't do drugs, they're bad. But if you're depressed or if you're going through some stuff or going through a breakup, they're not going to make it any better. It's going to be a short-term fix. And I think that was the worst of the party going, and you just make dumb decisions. And there's points where I just thought I wasn't going to wake up. I'd be on a 3-day bender and have Xanax to go to sleep, and you'd sort of just lie there and think like, fuck, this could be the one. And I've had that a few times, and I'm glad that it wasn't the one, so I can sit here and have these conversations and show people that you can go through that and come out of it and then do some great things. Or if you are going through that, then just maybe think, is this the right thing for me? Long term, is this going to be beneficial to my goals? Or is this a risky decision if I'm feeling like this? Because you may push it too far and you may be upset and depressed and then just have one too many pills or lines and then just go, fuck it, I don't want to live anymore, and then do make a dumb decision when you are intoxicated, not thinking clearly and thinking straight. So I think sort of went from one extreme to the other. I sort of went from like partying benders to then fitness personal trainer. I'm an extremist in anything I do. I don't just sort of do things half-hearted. So yeah.
And that's why you're on the NORMLESS podcast.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah. Just polar opposites. But I wouldn't change anything that's happened to me in my life. I appreciate everything. You learn lessons from all your hardships, your trials and tribulations, and I'm thankful for everything that's happened. Obviously, I would like to change some things that happened, but I don't regret anything I've done, because I'm sitting here now and I feel like I've done a lot of good things, and there's a lot more good things to do.
And you're exactly right, mate, when you draw that relationship between drug use and mental health. So we've got here the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare report from 2021. Now, mental health conditions were reported in 31% of Australians who use methamphetamines, compared to the 16.6% of non-users. So it's almost double the prevalence of mental health issues or conditions amongst those that are using those recreational drugs like methamphetamines. So, you know, you're extremely right there when you say that it's only going to amplify a lot of those issues. So I guess, was there a point where you realized that and you made the turn, if you are going to take these drugs and you do have that addictive personality, maybe, I guess, having an addiction for something like exercise is going to benefit you in terms of your health and psychological well-being?
Yeah, the sort of turning point was for me, because obviously I love going out and partying, and I was only working a average paying job. So to afford, I used to sell coke, and that's how I'd go out and party all the time. And I just made a dumb decision one time, which was the best decision I've made, of just dropping off to a pub where their cops actually arrested me for selling it. So I got taken back to the station, and I was sitting in my cell, and there was a lady with schizophrenia next to me, banging her head against the cell, in the glass cell, and I was like, "Fuck, I shouldn't be in here. I shouldn't be in here. Like I'm a good person. I just love going out and partying." And that was a sort of turning point for me of just being locked up and being like, "Fuck, this is not for me." And going to community service, and I was with I think probably 95% of them were in there for ICE. And then one of them was shooting up at community service at
Wow.
place I was doing it. And I was like, "Fuck, I'm just a normal guy. Like I'm a good guy. I'm not an asshole and a dickhead. I just loved going out." And that was sort of where I just went, you know what, fuck it, this is not for me. And that was sort of like the big turning point where I was like, I'm done with that, and just started training. Still go out every now and again, but like not just trying to escape something or just abusing. But that was the big wake up call, because I was like, fuck, I shouldn't be in here. But obviously,
Yeah, that was the reality check. Your reality check that you kind of needed to snap yourself back into gear. Yeah. So, and again, in this report, so I was just going through this report, and the statistics seem to be getting better year in, year out. And I think that's got a lot to do with people like yourself raising awareness, and I guess also the charity and fundraiser events that are happening at the moment. But 1,704 people were that died in 2021 this was caused by drugs, whether that be acute toxicity like overdoses or chronic, exposure, whether that be cardiac conditions. But benzodiazepines were the most commonly involved drugs. Were they the main class of drugs that you used? Was it
No, I had a fair few of those. It was just mainly like MDMA, pills. Just a bit, I stayed away from all like the ice and heroin and stuff like that. But pretty much anything else, like a lot of opioids and sleeping tablets, stuff like that. But yeah, just mainly coke and MDMA when I was like in the thick of it. But I was sort of having diazepams and Valiums and Xanax to go to sleep, and that's sort of obviously not a good mix. So if you are gonna do drugs, just be fucking smart about it. Don't make risky decisions.
And do you ever touch that stuff anymore? Or is it that thing of the past now?
Yeah, I'm sort of more into the health and fitness now. Like I go out every now and again and I'll drink and stuff, but I don't really like feeling drunk anymore. So I just run. I've got too many goals to feel like shit for so long, because if you go out and you party, you end up putting yourself back 2 weeks, and you lose your weekends. And because I work early mornings, late nights, I'm always on the go. So I don't have time to go out and party anymore, unfortunately. I'm too old for that. I'm 30. I'm not getting any younger.
And I think you probably lost touch with all those people to some extent. And then you find a new cohort of people who are engaged in that exercise space. And I guess that's a good thing in itself too. So in terms of a lot of the evidence around exercise, just like you talk about, you get that high from taking drugs. There's obviously a lot of research about, that serotonin and dopamine effect of exercise and the feel-good response we get from that. I was recently listening to a podcast, and they were talking about, I guess, how running to some extent is a good thing. But then, people like yourselves who might have that addictive personality, it can almost come to that point where it impacts you mentally. And I think I was listening to the podcast you did recently, the To Be Human podcast, and you were talking about, where's the point where running or extremes of physical activity or exercise become detrimental as opposed to healthy. And I think Ned was someone that I looked at recently and kind of got a bit of inspiration from, because we hear a lot about Goggins, don't we? And his mentality is, going 110% every day, every minute. He talks about those, rest stations, where you're sitting in a car, like a mental aid station kind of thing. And that's the only time you have to rejuvenate yourself, but you got to be pushing hard day in, day out. But I think that can also become a little bit of a toxic kind of mentality to have. And Ned was talking about how, coming into the run, he had a lot of injuries. So he almost found that resting coming into the run was going to benefit him more than the training he was doing. And I've been hearing a lot about running streaks lately. Have you heard much about that?
Yeah. People go on run streaks. They don't really last too long, but they're all the weekend warriors that head out there. I think just having a good, consistent plan and giving yourself rest days. Like no one's superhuman. You're not going to be able to run a marathon every day for the rest of your life. And you need to be able to adapt to it. Like your body will adapt to some point, but it's like if it's causing pain, if it's going to cause injury, overuse, or if it's detrimental to your relationships, your work. Obviously, it's an unhealthy habit to adopt. If you're just impacting other areas of your life, whether it not just be physical health, but your relationships, your partner. If you're just going out running, not rocking up to work, obviously that's a detrimental thing. So like the same thing as any sort of addiction.
Yeah.
It's going to impact other areas of your life. Obviously, your health, your relationships, your work, your career, then and maybe not healthy. But if you can find a happy balance of exercise and you do want to push limits, you can still run far, but obviously you got to rest and you got to sleep. Like Goggins doesn't have Strava, so I don't know what he does, but
what
check up on him.
What's your run streak? Have you ever tried to, commit to achieving a certain number of days? Or I guess the run itself from Perth to Sydney was a big enough run streak in itself, but like in terms of just purely the run streak rather than the journey or the distance?
Yeah, no, I haven't really done it. I just sort of like just coming up with a plan. I like to do a bit of everything. Like I'll lift weights, I'll cycle every now and again, bought a surf ski. So I don't like doing just one thing now after coming back. But yeah, probably maybe 70 something days was my longest run streak when I did that. But in the 2-year build up, I think my coach, I had a running coach those like a year and a half of it, and I only missed 4 runs that he programmed in to my training. And there was a lot of big runs in there, and you're running through winter, you run through rain. So that was sort of, I think that's better than a run streak. The discipline of hitting every run apart from 4 of them, whether I don't know it was due to maybe injury or sickness or whatever it was. But I think this consistency of someone putting something in there for you, and it's like, okay, I'm running 29K today, it's pissing down rain. The discipline to go out is a good achievement. My run streak's probably not as big as a lot of other people's.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, there's a guy from Britain, Ron Hill, like an old British runner and clothing manufacturer who ran every day for 52 years. He even left hospital when he was diseased to go for a 2-kilometer run. But 52 years. So that's insane. But like sometimes you wonder, like, whether when this kind of thing becomes almost an addiction that's unhealthy, just like a drug addiction to some extent. Obviously, exercise not the same as taking illicit drugs, but I think there comes a time where you got to draw the line, isn't there?
Yeah. Like I think anything if you're abusing or if you're running every day 52 years. Like I love running, but I'm not going to run every day for 52 years. But he's only running 2K a day, so it's not that far anyway.
Well, aerobic exercise, it activates the body's stress response, the HPA axis system. And many people engage in running because they think it's gonna relax them and give those positive effects. But to some extent, there's also a contradiction. And we just talked about that distinction between, good stress versus bad stress. Obviously, the physiological, the psychological stress in turn gives us our body's ability to adapt to overcome that stimulus when we're training. But I think we also need appropriate time to recover. And I think that's something that people are learning a lot more about. In terms of the run you did from Perth to Sydney, was there any particular like recovery strategies that you adopted throughout the run in that kind of stream of thinking about recovering from the run and recovery strategies that you kind of adopted to ensure that you were able to get up each day and fulfill the journey and the distance you were covering?
Yeah, my recovery protocol's always been terrible. I never used to stretch or anything like that. But I had compression boots, which I used probably like about 10 times over the run, but just general stretching, high protein diet, or what protein you get in, and just, getting enough sleep, drinking enough water. That was sort of my main things: protein, sleep, and water, and a little bit of body work like stretching and foam rolling and stuff like that. But there was no I didn't have a set routine. I sort of just out there running blind, really, just make it up as I went.
So was it like those recovery boots? Were they like the Normatec kind of cold compression boots?
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about buying a pair of those. Do you find they have much benefit, or do you think it's a more anecdotal?
I think it's anecdotal. Yeah, I haven't really used them enough. Like my legs were sore, and the next day they were still sore. So it's like, will they be any worse if I didn't wear them, or I don't really know.
more of a placebo effect potentially.
Yeah, I think it's elevated total evidence. If it's placebo, then it's worth getting.
But like I was listening to a podcast, the Running Channel podcast during the week. They were talking a bit about how you overcome those really mentally demanding kilometers. And this is really pertinent for me. When I was doing the New Run Marathon recently, it was really funny because my AirPods, like I think AirPods are notorious for their battery life after a while. Any like Apple devices to some extent. But my AirPods, I think they have about 4.5 hours battery life at the moment. But I got that far into the run, and then the last 2 kilometers, my AirPods died. So that last couple of kilometers, it was just me without my music, and just in my mind, you know. And the way you kind of get yourself through those more demanding kilometers or miles. And one of the things they were talking about was habit stacking. So kind of pairing something that you enjoy with something that you might find difficult. So for instance, you know, listening to a podcast while you're running. So listening to the NORMLESS podcast while you're running, or listening to your favorite tunes or music while you're running can be a way to counteract that. Is there anything that obviously your tunes, you only had a limited number because of the reception. But is there anything in training maybe that you've utilized to help you overcome those harder days when you might be feeling a little bit more sore, a little bit more, legs are feeling a little bit heavy? You know, what have you used to overcome those kind of moments or those days?
Yeah, I sort of just, what I did was think about my whole life and think about everything that across the run was a great reflection of my whole life and all the cool experiences I've had. And you're sort of running there and you're like, I remember I was in Central America and with my mate and this happened, I found a monkey and all that kind of stuff. Like you just think about those memories, I think was the biggest thing for me, because after a while, like music, you listen to one song, you listen to all songs, like there's no sort of set songs that sort of lift you up, or like podcasts are great, but you sort of just like listen to people talk. Obviously it's a good thing that you can distract yourself as well, but I think just sort of when I was out there, I think the memories sort of were like, this is going to be so good when I finish, and like thought about just all the things I've done in my life, all the cool things, obviously, and all the not so good things in my life. And I feel like that was sort of like a good reflection where it just sort of fueled me and kept me going.
Yep. And I think it's one of those things, isn't it? When you think about the people you love or the people that have believed in you, all those kind of things. But it's also, I think Ned was talking about how he had like a bit of a fuck you war for everyone that doubted him. And I think it was one of those stories that was kind of similar with the Boomerang Loop boys, which also did a run for Mindful Oz, which I had on the podcast. And they were talking about how they got basically declined by a whole host of experts that, you know, said that wrote them off, said they couldn't do the ride around Australia that they intended to do. Was there any element of that, you know, people writing you off and you had that bit of chip on your shoulder to prove them wrong?
No, I don't really give a fuck. I don't listen to anyone like that. I knew I could do it. But you're going to get people that project their own insecurities on you, obviously, if you're doing this big thing and they don't think they can do it. Why would they think you can do it? But there's obviously people out there that want to see me fail. And there's a lot of people out that want to see me succeed. And you get that with anything. Like you get sporting stars, you want to see, like people would want to see them get injured or their team lose. And when someone's doing a big thing, it's you definitely get people that are going to try and bring you down. But I never had like a fuck you wall or anything like that. I was just like, just out there, just enjoying it.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to be honest. In terms of when we're talking about the habit stacking principle, I guess to some extent it's a good in training. I guess if you're doing like a 5 kilometer time trial, or, you know, you're at race pace, there's a bit of I think a challenge there where you kind of start to focus more on the music or the podcast, and you kind of slip out of your splits, like your pace, and then sort of focus more on that. And that can sort of impact the intensity in which you're running at. In terms of tracking your intensity, do you have any like specific heart rate monitors you use, or any technology that you're kind of using at the moment?
I just wear my watch and just, I don't really track my heart rate. I sort of like to see my VO2 max if it's gone down, but every now and again, me and my mate see what his resting heart rate is and what mine is, and we have little battles to see who's fitter. But no, I just run to feel now. I sort of, if it feels good one day, I'll run a little bit quicker. If if I'm feeling a little bit sore, then I'll just slow it down. I sort of don't look at too much data because then it just overcomplicates things. It's like my watch always tells me that I'm overtrained or overexerted. I think it says that I need 52 hours recovery or 72 hours. It always comes up with, but then I'll just go out and run the next day. So if I was going to listen to my watch, tell me when I would run, I probably would never run. So, and I don't know how accurate they are either.
Yeah. So I assume you have a Garmin in that case.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So you obviously that interprets how long you need to recover and that kind of thing. It becomes a bit like analysis paralysis to some extent, doesn't it? Where you start like looking at everything, you know, your sleep, your splits, your resting heart rate, your VO2 max, all those kind of things. Essentially, I guess the thing I wanted to talk to you that's quite pertinent for you, being a guy that's, you know, obviously the listeners who are listening to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, they won't see the video content, but they can jump on the YouTube clips for Normless. But you got a lot of tats, mate, and you know, it's a common thing these days. A lot of tattoos. But I actually learned, one of the things I learned recently was that actually tattoos can actually affect the transmission of light from your heart rate monitor, whether that be on your wrist or your activity monitor on your wrist, in terms of picking up your heart rate. So it's actually, you know, affect the accuracy of those readings, which I found quite interesting. Have you ever noticed anything like that on your runs? You know, do you wear it on, I assume your left and right wrist is covered. Is that?
Yeah. I'm covered from neck to toes. Yeah. No, I've never noticed. Maybe I'm fitter than I am. Who knows?
Yeah, well, I guess
I've never really noticed. I don't really check it too much where like I don't analyze the data and notice that I'm running quicker, but then my heart rate's gone up or gone down or anything like that. But does it say it's an accurate reading or does it make you?
I think the heart rate monitors these days, the activity monitors seem to be quite accurate and they're quite good. But it was just something I listened to recently. I probably have to look into a little bit more to really elicit some of the finer details of the research. But there's something interesting I thought, you know, bringing up with yourself, considering you have so many tattoos, and whether it's something that maybe, you know, you didn't have a tattoo on your left wrist and you've got a recent tattoo and now your heart rate's out or something of that nature. I don't know.
I got a resting heart rate of 20 with my
maybe
tattoo.
maybe someone listening that's had a similar experience might come forward and let us know. But the other thing is the trail running these days. So I did the city to surf, the 14K. This was all like a COVID thing, similar to a lot of people, you know, out of COVID was gyms are closed. Let's get into a bit of running. But I got into running and then did the city to surf, did the half marathon, did the marathon. And then I was like, well, you know, what's the next thing if you're going to do another run? What's the next step up from that? And a lot of trail running, you know, or bush bashing, whatever people call it. But apparently, when you do the trail running, there's a lot of people who are noticing that their VO2 maxes are like dropping off a cliff once they go from running on flats like the road to trail running. And what they're finding is that because, well, your VO2 max on those devices is calculated by how often and how fast you run. That's what, and it basically, if you've been wearing your device for a period of time, your VO2 max has been established by that certain device. And then when you're doing trail running, you tend to run slower because of all the hills and you're running through a different terrain, but your heart rate tends to be higher. And so this estimates a drop in your VO2 max. And so it's a really interesting phenomenon that, and I was going to again ask you if you have experienced anything of that nature. You know, have you done any trail running or?
No, I hate the trails. Actually, I love open roads. Yeah, I don't really run trails because there are some trails around my area, but it's like a 25-minute drive, and I don't like driving to run. I'll just leave my front door and run. But
run to run.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. It's quite interesting.
But apparently the Garmin's are really good because they allow you to select the terrain that you're running on, and then this kind of preventing this from happening, or that like it accommodates that you're running on different terrain than you normally would. So that's another really interesting thing that I found there. But I think for anyone out there who's like looking to get a heart rate monitor, I think the gold standard is those chest straps, as opposed to something sitting on the wrist. So like a polar heart rate monitor with a chest strap is probably the best way to go there. But besides the Normatec, you know, your Garmin, is there anything there that you would recommend for anyone else who's kind of getting into running, or they're in the early stages trying to work out, you know, what's the best way to monitor? I know you said you weren't really into a lot of the different technologies or, you know, fads out there, but is there anything in particular that you found really useful yourself, whether it be apps or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I sort of a few things. When I first started running, I was trying to get my cadence up. So anyone knows the cadence, like how many steps per minute. So if you want to check your cadence, obviously it's going to vary from person to person. Like we're not all built the same, but I think the average they recommend is 180 steps per minute. And I'm obviously a little bit taller, so I'd take a little bit less. But just even a metronome just to check in, like just a monotonous sound in your ear, you just set up to 180 and you just put it on. It's just like beep, beep, and just trying to step like that.
Yeah.
If you are getting injured, that'll help a lot from overstriding. And just a good pair of shoes, I think. I think that's the best thing. Just getting a good pair of shoes, going to a good running shop, and just getting fitted up by a professional. Don't just look online and go, I'm going to get the Nike Vaporflies and assume that's going to be good for my foot, because a lot of the time people shouldn't be wearing those. How they pronate or supinate, how their foot lands and how their foot's built as well. Like if they've got a no arch or a high arch, I mean, different shoes to accommodate that. But yeah, I think a metronome, just checking in. And also the headphones I've been running in are the shock ones. Have you seen, like, they go over your ears, but they vibrate?
Yeah,
So
I
you
think
can still hear everything. Like nothing goes in you. It sits on the front of you. They're weird looking things. And you can still hear like cars coming and stuff like that. But you can also listen to music at the same time. I think it's probably the safest way to run. So I used to run with these big headphones on, and then I got some sort of earbuds which you can't hear anything outside. So I think if you are running on the road or running around the streets, and getting sort of those headphones where they shock in their wireless as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in that. I was running around with these Beats on for a while, but then I just sort of made them like my podcast headphones. But even running with these, you take them off after a while and you realize how heavy they are, especially when you do those longer runs. So I think, you know, those Beats or I think I've seen those Beats ones now that are like over the ear, and they kind of really good as well, because I find that the AirPods I've got at the moment with the little buds on them at the end, they kind of pop out of the ear frequently. And they're obviously the battery life I find isn't as good. So some good tips out there for anyone who's listening that you know, is getting into running or wants to find a pair of good headphones to use. I think that's really, really useful information, mate. Have you, like, when you're on the run, you said you didn't do much stretching. You had those Normatec compression boots. But did you ever at any stage, you know, or was there any roadhouses along the way or servos where you get bags of ice and like an esky or something and just hop in there? Because there's obviously a lot of literature now that goes to show that there is some really strong benefits in terms of recovery with cryotherapy.
Yeah, I think when my ankle was the size of a grapefruit, I think we had got like filled out, emptied one of our storage buckets we had there, like a little tub there, and we filled it with ice, and then I just put my legs in it. But there was nothing big enough that I was carrying that I could sit in, because I'm 6'3". So, but yeah, a lot of benefits in inflammation and recovery as well. Obviously, not just me running every day and then jumping in there. I won't get the adaptations as much if you sort of get that inflammation and that stress and you try and take it away. But definitely if you're doing something like that, you do have access to a blow up pool and access to ice. If you are going like do a multi-day things where you do want to recover quicker, I reckon there's a lot of benefits to the cold exposure.
Yeah, and as you hit the nail on the head there with that adaptation, because there's a lot of literature coming out now about how it impacts protein synthesis. So I guess in training, when you're trying to get those adaptations, it is obviously something that isn't as beneficial. I think I was listening to Andrew Huberman recently. He was talking a little bit about how ice baths before things like strength training are now really more beneficial for protein synthesis as opposed to doing it after your session. And a lot of rugby teams. So I did a little bit of work with the New South Wales Waratahs Generation Blue performance team, and the principles they kind of adopted was more you know, warm hydrotherapy prior to you know, in the preseason, when they're trying to get those adaptations and build strength and build muscle mass and promote those adaptations we talked about. Warm hydrotherapy they generally utilize to prevent, you know, losing that improvement in protein synthesis And then during the season, when they've got to go back to back with matches, and often, you know, you see these days in the National Rugby League, they have really short turnarounds. And cryotherapy in that sense, I guess they're prioritizing recovery as opposed to getting those adaptations in season. So then it can be a really good thing, you know, going back to back. So I just thought in the nature of a run like you did from Perth to Sydney, where you'd really want to place your focus on that quick turnaround and recovering really quickly. I think, I can imagine that something like that cold therapy would be really beneficial. And I know something that Ned tended to use throughout his run as well. You saw he was doing a lot of ice baths to help him really recover and bounce back for that next day, especially when you got so much inflammation from just pounding the pavement all day. You know, I can't imagine how long you were on the road running for each day. Like,
Yeah, like 7, 8 hours.
8 hours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Yeah, ice is great for injury prevention. So you're obviously trying to prevent injuries. You're not trying to adapt as you go. You're just trying to be able to get up and run the next day. So
Yeah. So Sam Bell, he's another guy like yourself, like Ned, like these guys doing these crazy endurance events. He's actually planning to run around Australia next year. So he's going to do, I think it's like 14,000 kilometers. And he's even going to tick off Tasmania, I think. I don't think anyone's done that before, but he's going to try and tick off Tasmania as well. And he talks about strength, the importance of him focusing on strength through the glutes, the hamstrings, the quadriceps. And he does a lot of strength training. So I'm not talking about like muscular endurance training, which seems to be emphasized a lot in endurance athletes. And he was talking a lot about how, you know, doing this strength training has really helped him build a foundation to, you know, stay strong and durable on the road when he's running. Have you found the same thing in terms of your own training? I know that you do a lot of strength training as well. Do you sort of, when you're training for this event, did you focus more around, you know, lower rep ranges with heavier weight or higher intensities of load? Or
yeah,
were
when
you
I
doing,
first started training towards it, I
yeah,
was just lifting heavy weights
heavy
and then
weight? Yeah.
trying to run far. But then I sort of had to think, okay, what's more important for me? And it was probably getting better at running further. So I just had to, it's a fine line between like overtraining weights wise or strength training, and then sort of like finding that happy medium where it's sort of you can still run and perform in the gym and out on the road as well. So when you're not super sore, you don't just do a heavy leg session like squats, deadlifts, leg press, leg extension, then try and run 50K after it. So
Yeah.
but I think it's super important to do. Like a lot of runners should be doing strength training for injury prevention. And there's imbalances as well. Like I have a weak glute, so a glute medial. So as I run, my hips rock, and that causes pain all down my right side. A lot of times, so it's just obviously strength training will help fix that. Just working on the imbalances and then just becoming strong and be able to run further and feel stronger. You run faster.
Yeah.
I reckon it's super important.
And I think Sam really lays the blueprint too, because he actually did a run from Cairns to Melbourne. So he did the run that not many people do, the one from Queensland to New South Wales, or Queensland and Melbourne, sorry. But he said that it was absolutely torturous, you know, running from up north, having your support vehicle just trailing like behind you, going 5 to 8 kilometers an hour for the whole journey. And he was just getting flip the bird and people bipping him and yelling out, you know, fuck you and get off the road and all sorts of criticism. But he really laid the blueprint there, because he said he didn't get an injury when he was running. He recovered really well. And I think, you know, a lot of the principles he talked about in terms of making sure you're strong and durable, I think are really pertinent messages for a lot of people, especially getting into running. You kind of want to build that strong base and that foundation of a strong body before you start really pounding kilometers out through the legs, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And being for me 95 kilos, I'm either have to get stronger so I can be able to run as far as I do, or I have to lose weight and just keep running as
Yeah.
fast. So yeah, strength training is super important.
But also like interval training, hill sprint. Did you do a lot of that in the lead up to this event as well? Was there, you know, how did you periodize your running programming?
Yes, I do a lot of hills, a lot of long runs. I do a lot of so I do sort of like my average, like it'd be like sort of a 4 or 5 week build into like a big event. So obviously run from Perth to Sydney, you have to be able to run far and it has to be monotonous. So it was slowly just building my runs up and then building my confidence as well, which was the biggest thing. So when I first started, it sort of be like a 4 or 5 week build into, maybe it was like a week of 10Ks, then it was a 4 or 5 week build into 21 half marathons in 21 days, and then it sort of got bigger and bigger, and you're just moving that needle a little bit further. It's like, that's your new normal. Okay, well, then you go, that's a new normal. You'd always just slowly build, where you're building the confidence and obviously building the mileage, where you are able to run back-to-back days. But I think then you can train to run across Australia. It's just, there's no amount of kilometers and no amount of lived experience being out there as well. You don't have access to your warm bed, your physio, your friends, your shower. Like when you're on the road, it's so much different to when you're running around your house. Like you could do 60 Ks a day around your house and you go home, get in your bed, or you're feeling a little bit sore, you go see a physio, go get a massage. But when you're actually out there, it's so much harder.
Yeah. I can only imagine, mate. And I just kind of reiterate what you said there. Goggins talks a lot about it, but like the belief, you're talking about the confidence you build, and the belief is built through the work you do. And once you've done that work, then self-talk becomes something which can be a bit more effective. Obviously, if you haven't done the work and you're going into an event like this, well, then you can't really expect yourself to come out with a whole heap of confidence that you're going to fulfill the journey. So I think when you do the work, that's when you kind of eliminate that self-doubt. And I think that's something that in your story kind of shines through, is, you know, you did the training and you prepared for it in a way that enabled you to be confident as you approached the journey. And when you're going over there, because I imagine obviously you've taken the camper van across to Perth. It would have been a 4 or 5 day drive. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you would have been going, holy shit, like I'm going to run this whole journey. And we've been driving nonstop for like 4 days.
Yeah, it was like I think it was 5 days. So it was a lot of 10-hour days driving in the camper van. It was sort of like back in the day when you used to line up for the footy, you'd size up the opposition. But yeah, I was sort of sizing it up for a month, going like, 4 or 5 days, going like, fuck, I'm gonna be running this for like more than 2 months. So it was like when I was driving, I was like, this is terrible driving over. And I was like, fuck, but I got to run back. So, but yeah, it was sort of cool to see like what I'd be running on, to be like, okay, well, the shoulders here. It was sort of like a bit calming because I've never driven across the country or seen all of the roads from in between Perth and Sydney. So I was expecting like dirt roads, nothing. I was like, it's not as bad as I thought. There was some terrible stretches, but it was sort of like, okay, well, there are shoulders to run on. It's obviously super dangerous, but it's not as dangerous as I thought. I thought I'd be running like on the road and have to jump off, but there are shoulders for most parts of it anyway.
A lot of roadkill as well. Apparently that, like the stench of that, you could smell from like 100 meters away coming up to it.
Yeah, I got to the point where I knew something was coming up. I could tell what animal it was. So it was either like a kangaroo, like it was sort of weird. Like, that smells like a kangaroo, and it'd be a kangaroo, or that smells like an echidna or a wombat. Like it's just, they have all different smells. But yeah, it's the smell and flies as well. I think the flies was the worst. I remember going to sleep like the first night running out of Perth, and there was so many flies like flying in front of your eyes that when you close your eyes, you could just see those flies still.
Wow. Do you think that was just your brain playing tricks on you from
sleep paralysis? Just flies flying in front of me.
Sleep, yeah. And so, what have you ever did you ever consider, you know, taking potentially 2 vans? A lot of people have talked about how it's hard when you have a support crew and you're running for so long, and then you also have to get enough sleep. It can be hard with, you know, cooking, washing up, and being in a little van with multiple people, and, you know, they're up helping you obviously stay on track with your preparation and food and clothing, whatever it be. Like getting enough sleep, or, you know, with lights on and people up and about, did that make it hard at any stage? And did it really, did it test your relationship with your partner at any point?
So yeah, we we got probably one of the smallest, not one of like the hippie campers, but
Yeah.
it's like a big transit van. So it's not like an RV, it's like a bigger van. We got one of those and we had so much stuff that it was like playing Jenga to trying to pull pieces and like put them in different spots. Like we'd have the bed was made,
Yeah.
and there'd be boxes and boxes of shit, and I was like, "Fuck, how are we gonna?" Like, there's no room for us to sleep, so it was just we had the smallest van and so much stuff, and over time we just sort of got rid of it and we stacked it all away. But yeah, it was just me and her. So it was we're broken up now. That wasn't the reason why we broke up, but yeah, it was sort of, I think for me, she sacrificed like 2 months and she was sort of doing everything for me. But there was times where I was moody and took it for granted, and times where she was tired and bored and stuff like that. But we didn't really have any massive fights where I was like, oh, she was going to leave me there. But it was sort of hard just to do it with me and her because she had to do everything. And then all I had to do was pretty much run and get to the van, get to the van where she had to cook, clean, drive, take photos where we could and do everything. So it would be nice with a bigger team to do it. It'd be so much easier if you had a van and people could drive ahead and people would do, they all have their own jobs. But I sort of liked it how it was just us two. It was probably the hardest way you can do it. And I still made it. So
Yeah. And it's so much respect to her as well. You know, I think to think about, like, it was hard on you as the runner, obviously, you know, the journey, but, you know, the drive would have been just as hard, and all the prep, you know, when you're out on the road for over 2 months, just driving and living in that small little van and doing all the chores for you as well. It would be such a big task as well, you know, and I'm sure you couldn't have done what you did without her support as well.
yeah, not at all. We're still really good friends now. She works at there's two gyms, so we got Trans 40 Carlton and Caringbah, and we used to work for the same company. So I see her like every week, and we're just really good friends now. But yeah, it's I obviously ran, but she was just as big a part of it as I was.
Yeah.
Without her, that I would have been running with a shopping trolley. So
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, mate. Are you a superstitious guy? Do you have any superstitions with your running? You know, can you shoot, like, some people, you know, put their shoes in the closet, they can't touch each other, or the laces have to be undone in the shoe or whatever. I don't know. Do you have any weird superstitions you've got with your running, or?
no, no superstitions. I feel like I can't get swooped by magpies.
Oh,
That's sort of
really?
like I've just always thought that they don't never swoop me, and always like when I like walk, people get swooped, and I'm like, I've never been swooped by a magpie.
I,
I don't know.
I, I
Is
can't,
that a
I can't,
superstition?
I
Is that
can't,
this is
I
my
can't,
own theory?
yeah, I can't say the same thing. Mate, when we used to get hammered back where I used to live in Freshwater on the northern beaches, and down our street there was signs on the flag on the poles, like the trees or wherever on the poles, like the telegraph poles, you know, warning. And there was a magpie there that used to swoop like notoriously, same time every year. Used to get my mum. My mum walked in the house one day and was like bleeding out of her head because it came and pecked her. But I think they actually put that magpie down because it was so vicious
Oh,
and
really? Yeah, I used to not
vicious.
work. I used to volunteer for Wise, who would rehabilitate animals. So I had a magpie for a little bit. Maybe that's why I think that I'm like a bit of a
Yeah.
magpie whisperer.
Yeah, well, maybe you're just they see you as a good citizen as opposed to,
I
you know,
hope so.
yeah. In terms of what you're doing moving forward, you know, it's obviously you got a really astonishing story, Troy. It's like incredible to listen to the journey you've been through. I know that you obviously have Bloke's Perspective. You're the founder of Bloke's Perspective. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that all involves and where the listeners can find more?
Yeah, so me and one of my friends were just sort of chatting one day, and he was working in youth work, and I was personal trainer, but obviously a mental health advocate as well. And he's like, we should just start like a page for men, because in our area there's been so many suicides and so many people suffer depression. Obviously, working in youth work, you would see that, and me working as a personal trainer is you're a counsellor and you train people as well. So we're like, we should just start a page where we just jump on and just share tips and tricks that we've learned over the years of going through stuff. And it sort of started there. And then we started getting people on to speak about their own experience as well, because we realized that after a while, people just don't want to see our ugly heads on the Instagram page. So we get people on that speak about like their own experiences, tips they may have learned, and they can share with people, because my tips might help Bob, it might not help Tom. So the more people we get on, and to show people that everyone does suffer, and such a normal thing, and a thing that happens in life, like 1 in 5 will experience some sort of mental illness, and just getting a vast array of people on to share their experiences, just to show that it's super common and you can reach out and you can speak up and be heard. So yeah, it's a cool little project that we have.
Yeah. And there's something that not many people know about you, but 18 months ago, you were in a really dark hole yourself, weren't you? I think you were standing on, you might tell the listeners about it, but there was a moment where you actually tried to take your own life.
Yeah, so it was about 18 months ago, and me and my ex broke up, and it wasn't so much I think I now look back on it now, it's because I obviously came from drugs and partying and just making stupid decisions, where then I ran across Australia and was doing all these good things, that I was like, I'm actually a really good person. I'm in a good part of my life. And then obviously going through a breakup, and I was like, it was sort of a massive hit to my ego. It's
Yeah.
like, I was like, fuck, I just got like broken up with, and I was just sort of in this turbulent headspace, and didn't know, because I've suffered depression before, and I was just like, what the fuck is going on? And then I got to a point where I was just like so hurt and down. I drove to Cornell Cliffs and was just looking out there, and I get how people do take their own life, is they have all these turbulent emotions and they're trying to grasp for the most logical thing, but you never feel like there's a way out of those thoughts. And the only thing was, that's the way out, like looking at the cliff. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. Drove home, like, and then for the whole weekend, it was like, you should have done, you're a pussy, blah blah. And just so, I don't know, it was just the weirdest, because I've never sort of felt like that extreme and like that quickly. And I ended up running back out. Then I stood on the edge of the cliff, and I was like, okay, well, like, I'm going to find if I actually want to do it. And I ran out there and stood on the edge, and was just started breaking down. I was just like sat on the rock and just started crying. And I was like, fuck, like. And then one of my mates called me, and I was just like, I just don't know what I'm thinking. It's just like, that was the only logical explanation, is like,
It's so courageous of you to tell your story, mate. I think, there's probably a lot of people out there that are feeling very much the same way. And hopefully maybe just one person listening to this podcast that hears that, might reach out to you. And I'm sure that, Troy, you'd be open to them reaching out to you if they're going through some tough times. There's also a whole host of other different organizations out there that can really help them too. Now, Bloke's Perspective, I think, is Blake the other co-founder of Bloke's Perspective?
Kyle.
Okay. But Blake is fundraising.
Yeah, so Blake was one of our guests we got on, yeah.
And he's raising money for a world record surf session, I think it is. And it's like 30 hours and 11 minutes surfing session. And he's almost raised like $500,000. And this is something I think you guys are getting behind, and you're trying to help him raise money for. Is there a way our listeners can donate? That's another crazy, like, it's really interesting to hear people doing things like that. But the only thing, like, I was talking to the guys from the Boomerang Loop, and I was saying how sitting on a bike for 24 hours, 16 hours in a day, I'd have a sore ass. But the only thing I'm thinking of, if I was surfing for 30 hours, my fingers would be pruning like crazy, and you'd be freezing, you'd be cold. I don't know what conditions they're doing it in, but can you tell us a little bit more about that event and how people can get behind it?
Yeah, so he actually got the world record. So yeah, he was raising money for the Chumpy Pullen Foundation, who do a lot of kids' mental health stuff. So he was aiming for a 40-hour surf. So I think the previous record was like 35 or 30 something hours, and
So that was the previous record.
Yeah, and then he smashed it with the 40 hours as well. So, but it was a massive to stay out in the salt water, and also all I'd be thinking about for those 40 hours is the shark going to come and get me? But yeah, so he's raised a hell of a lot. So yeah, if you go to the Bloke's Perspective page and then click on his profile, I'm sure he's to have the link in his bio as well.
Yeah, I think you can just click on the link tree in your bio as well.
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's
probably on there as well. Yeah,
that's what I did before. Yeah, coming on. So if you want to click the link in Troy, I'll put your Instagram username in the show notes so people can just click on your Instagram, and if they want to donate or read a bit more about it, they can go and find it there. But yeah, no, it's been a really interesting episode today, Troy. It's been a pleasure to meet you, mate, and hear about your stories. And you've been really courageous in sharing a lot of your own hardships, but also all the little details of the run, which I think people find really interesting. So yeah, just want to commend you on the journey, mate. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.